Our guest today is Chaz Roemer. He is the president of the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education in Louisiana, serving his second term. He graduate of Harvard, native of Shreveport, and at the age of 44, he is now older than his dad was when he was elected governor. And he's here to talk to us about Common Core and an update on his father. You didn't know his father suffered a medical emergency a few weeks ago, and he was doing better. Here's Chaz Roemer.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I will say a brief word about my father. He did have a small stroke about 4 weeks ago. He's doing quite well. He's back at work. And he's as impatient as ever. So he's doing well. He had a little bit of weakness in his right hand. That's come back probably 90%. And some would say, fortunately, his speech was impacted. That's come back, and they expect him to get full recovery as well for that. So I appreciate the kind words and the thoughts today. I'll say a couple things before we get started. Number one, I don't write down my speeches. This is the extent of my speech. It's on this note card. And I'm getting older, so I can't even read the notes on here anymore. But I do that on purpose. I like my speeches to be a good conversation. I like it to be conducive to a good debate. I like it to be a true, candid conversation about the issues. And I find that if you write out speeches word for word, you become very cautious. You think about it to the point where you don't actually say anything. That you're so careful in your speech writing that you walk away and you wonder, well, what did he just say? So I have full confidence there'll be no doubt about what I say today. But I want you to know I don't spend time writing out my speeches. The second thing I'd like to point out before we really begin is, I don't know, most everyone in this room I'm familiar with, and you're familiar with me. I do like generally to let people know a little bit about me, how I got here, and how it impacts who I am. I think we're all a product of our past and our own histories, and I'm no exception to that. And I'll keep it short on this point. I'll say this, I've been around politics all my life, literally all my life. My father ran at the Constitutional Convention in 1973. I was old enough to remember that. My grandfather was Commissioner of Administration for some time period during the Edmund administration. My father ran for Congress and served. I remember going to Congress. I was in my 10 years old, and I'd walk onto the House floor, and I'd sit next to Tip O'Neill while Tip O'Neill would preside over the Congress, and Tip O'Neill would tell me, what was happening. My father served as governor, obviously, in the late 80s. I learned a lot during that time. It was my 4 years in college. And I say all that to say this. I'm not in love with politics. I'm not enamored with it. I don't spend time plotting a great political future. I don't spend time wringing my hands worried about my politics. Politics comes and goes. For those people that spend a lifetime trying to obtain office, I think they're destined, many of them are destined to be unhappy. Many of them are destined to make compromises on their principles in order to remain electable. So I don't spend a great deal of time thinking about my politics. I spend my time, quite frankly, thinking about my family and my kids and the kind of state that I want them to grow up in and the kinds of opportunities I'd like them to have. Everything I do is on behalf of my two kids, who are now 13 and 11. It's not about my politics. It's about my relationship with my kids and my hope that they will have the chance to live in Louisiana. Now, they may choose to live somewhere else. It's a great place out there. There's lots of great places around this country and around this world. But my hope is that they'll have the opportunity to live right here in Louisiana. I've spent the last 2 years as president of the BESE board, and one of the things I've enjoyed most is traveling the state. You know, I thought we spent too much time as a board in the Claiborne building. I thought we spent too much time in Baton Rouge and not enough time in classrooms dealing with real teachers and real students and real parents. And I found a couple things. One, a lot of things I'm encouraged by. The vast majority of our teachers and educational professionals are A+. They work extra hours, they're underappreciated, and they're underpaid. And we've put them through a great deal of change in a short period of time. I've learned that our teaching professionals are resilient. I respect them for that. I've also learned of what's the greatest problem in Louisiana. When I first came to BESE some 7 years ago, we were having a vote. It was a vote on whether the state should take over some failing schools. We have a law in this state that if schools fail for a number of years in a row, they're eligible to be taken over by the state. I'm not a big believer in the state running schools. I think schools ought to be run by parents in the community and the neighborhoods that they live in. And I made a decision. Two things. One, while I don't believe a state should take over a school, I also don't believe we can allow a school to continue to fail and do nothing about it. So I had to cross that bridge in my mind. Am I willing to sit here and allow failure to continue without trying something different? And the answer to that was no, I was not willing to do nothing. The second thing I had to do was if I were going to vote for the state to take over these schools, I needed to go visit every one of them personally. I didn't call the press. I didn't bring anybody with me. I went by myself and I visited every one of the schools that we were considering for takeover. And there's one common denominator at every one of these schools. Low expectations. The biggest cancer in our state is low expectations. When I visited these schools, the teachers, I shouldn't say all the teachers, some of the teachers and some of the school leaders had no expectations for their own students. And if the leaders of a school don't expect the kids to learn, if the leaders of the school don't expect the students to be college and career ready, do you think the students believe they can be college and career ready? They don't. The number one problem in our state is low expectations. Now, I'm an optimist. I'm reminded of there's a story of a major in the Army who was fighting on an island in World War II, and he was surrounded on all sides. And it was bleak. And his lieutenant said, things look bad, Major. We're in trouble. We're surrounded on all sides. He said, oh, quite the contrary. We can fire in any direction. See, I'm an optimist. We actually have some good things happening in this state. 2 years ago, we made it mandatory that every high school junior and senior take the ACT in this state. Very controversial. Oh, we're going to mandate the ACT, which, by the way, is a national standard. Okay, it's a national standard. But we had kids in this state who we knew were capable of going to college, but they never dreamed of going to college. They didn't have a parent who woke up every day talking about colleges. They didn't go tour college campuses. They never had that door open for them. We knew that if we required the ACT, it would open the minds and open doors for the future of students in this state. And guess what? We've had thousands of students now who would not have otherwise taken the ACT, who scored high enough to go to a four-year college. It's called high standards and high expectations. This year, we just announced last week, we made the AP test count towards school performance scores. Again, another controversial thing of making a high standard part of how we judge a school. And guess what? We had the highest increase in the country of students who scored a 3 or higher on an AP exam. That's in Louisiana, friends. The highest increase of any state in America is called high standards. I could go on. We've had a lot of other successes. I could go on. We have a short period of time, and I know there are other issues you want to talk about, but let's get to the heart of the matter. What is Common Core? Common Core is high standards. Common Core is a message to the rest of the country and the rest of the world that Louisiana is prepared to compete. That's what Common Core is. It's a message to the world that for the first time in my lifetime, Louisiana is going to make a statement to the world that we are ready to compete. And I only will know one way to compete. That's called comparing apples to apples. You know, it's interesting. The coaches poll, the football poll, college football just came out. The coaches ranked our teams in America. LSU was ranked number 13. Guess what? Many people in this community were disappointed. Disappointed that our team was ranked 13. Why aren't we number one? That's the question. That ought to be the same question we ask of our students and our classrooms. Why aren't we number one? We wouldn't ask LSU football to only compete with teams in Louisiana, would we? We ask them to compete against every team in America, and we ask them to be the best. We don't tell LSU to play on an 80-yard field, do we? And to widen the goalpost. We tell them we'll play on a 100-yard field, and we'll play any team, anywhere, anytime, and we're going to do the same things with our schools and with our students. We're ready to compete in Louisiana. If we expect our state to flourish, we can't send any mixed messages to the rest of the world. We got to send a clear message. We expect the best of our students and of our workers, and we're prepared to compete. The fiasco we're going through right now is a fiasco caused by one person. Sends gridlock to our classrooms, mixed messages to our teachers, mixed messages to our students, mixed messages to the rest of the country, mixed messages to the rest of the world. We've been having this debate in this state for 5 years. It didn't happen 5 weeks ago. It didn't happen 5 months ago. We've been having it for 5 years. We've debated it ad nauseum in the legislature. We've debated it ad nauseum at the BESE board. The governor made it very clear before this last legislative session that he wanted to change it, and they chose not to. The governor made it clear to the BESE board that he wanted to change it, and we chose not to, including his own appointees, by the way. Now, we don't live in a state where one man can overrule the Constitution. Now, if that's the state we live in, we've got bigger problems than I ever imagined. If we live in a state where the legislature and the BESE board, the constitutional bodies that are given the authority to make education decisions in this state, if we live in a state where a governor can single-handedly overrule them, we got bigger problems. We're going to keep Common Core in this state because it's the law. And we're going to keep Common Core in this state because it's a higher standard for our kids, and it's a message to the rest of the world that we're ready to compete. We talk about the companies that are coming to Louisiana and the manufacturing that we have in Louisiana. We have a lot of advantages. A lot of advantages. But I guarantee you one thing. If we send a message to the world that we're not prepared to educate their kids and we're not prepared to educate our workers, they will not come. You can give them all the tax breaks you want to give them. You can give them all the water you want to give them. You can give them all the natural gas you want to give them. At the end of the day, people want to make sure their kids are taken care of and their kids are getting an education. No responsible CEO in America would choose a second-class education system. None. Now, I'm optimistic. Our numbers are growing. Everyone from Dave DeVitter to Mary Landrew said they support this. Now, I can't think of any other issue with a broad support. I can't think of any more. I can't think of another issue in education where you can say that. Louisiana's a good state. We need good leadership. We need clear leadership. We need decisive leadership. We need leadership that spends less time on politics and more time worried about our people and our kids. We need leadership not concerned about their own future, but concerned about the future of our state. That's what we need. I'm optimistic. We're going to win this. Whether it happens next week or next month or 6 months from now, we're going to win this. I'll finish with this final comment, and it's to the teachers and the parents and the students. I believe in you. We're going to teach Common Core in this state because it's a law. And you're going to have the full support of the BESE board as we work our way down this path. Keep up the good work. Thank you. I'll answer any easy questions.
Chaz, is it your opinion that the governor has taken the stance he has because of nothing that has to do with Louisiana, that only has to do with his political ambitions?
The question was, do I believe I'm the smartest man on the planet? Is that what you asked? No, the question was, do I believe the governor took his position due to national politics rather than something to do with Louisiana? Look, there are some people that have concerns about Common Core, okay? And there are some that believe it's a federal takeover, and there's no evidence to support that. But I think it's very clear that the governor spends more time worried about his national politics than he does our state. Look at his schedule. I don't know what else you need to point to. And again, I point to the broad base of support that we have for this issue. And I have no other explanation for his position.
Certainly there's been confusion about using words, standards, confused with curriculum, which is wrong, obviously. But does the State Department and BESE have some responsibility in the development of, or non-development of curriculum?
Sure. It's a good question. The question was, does the BESE Board and Department of Education have some responsibility in regard to curriculum? If there's sometimes confusion between standard and curriculum. But first of all, let me say this. Despite the fact that we moved toward Common Core, we give more decision-making to the schools at the school level and the district at the district level than we ever have before in the history of our state, in terms of what text they're going to use, in terms of the curriculum and how they get there. We set a goal, but we let them determine how they're going to get there. To go back to my football analogy, I know everybody gets tired of my football analogy. We're not telling schools what offense and what defense they have to run. We're telling them to win the game. Okay, that's the same thing we're doing with our schools. Now, we probably went too far, quite frankly. About 2 years ago, we made a decision basically to quit forcing the curriculum down. And a lot of districts like that. The larger districts in particular that were prepared for that kind of freedom, they like it. They ran with it. I can point to some Jefferson Parish and some others that did quite well with it. However, we probably went too far, especially in a time of change. We didn't provide that original guidance on curriculum, and we went back and we've now kind of corrected that. But it's not a curriculum that they're mandated to use. It's a suggested curriculum that they can use if they wish. And they can choose which text to complement that as they wish as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but there's some legitimate concern of people saying, we don't have the curriculum.
Sure.
And it's very uneven across the state.
It is.
As you
And I was very loud a year ago, probably, and we spent a great deal of time about a year ago having toured the state, and that was one of the things that we heard. It wasn't that I'm against Common Core or I'm against this. It's, if you once gave us a little more support with curriculum than you're giving us now, we need some of that support. So we come back in with that support. Probably should have done that a little better on the front end.
Chaz, perhaps we shall keep Common Core, but shall we keep John White?
Well, I think we're lucky to have John White. I mean, I think he's one of the best state superintendents in all of the country. I get to work with John on a daily basis. He does his homework. He's conscientious. He supports what I would call education reform, but believes a great deal in making sure we're providing adequate support to the traditional education systems. We're going to keep John White.
Chad, where do the announced candidates for governor coming up stand on the Common Core issue?
I hate to even speak for, it's my understanding, and I just read the papers, that all of the candidates, and I'm thinking of three right now in particular, John Bell Edwards, David Bitter, and Jay Darby, have all said they support Common Core, all in the last 2 weeks. So, I mean, that's probably a question better for them, but that's my understanding.
Yes, you think that BESE, in the manner in which BESE adopted and rolled out the Common Core standards, that did help create the problem of lack of information early on that made people so fearful of the standards? And I guess I'm wondering, what do you think BESE's role was? Linda Johnson has said that she thinks that standards were adopted, but there wasn't enough focus on promoting them and explaining them to people who were going to be impacted by them. Do you agree with that?
It's a big statement. I think it's a fair statement to say that the opposition and the arguments, whether they're true or not, against Common Core got out ahead of the positive comments that were coming from BESE and others. And we probably could have done a better job on the front end of explaining it in fairly simple terms as I think I did today. We allowed it to become morph into something that it's not. And we probably should have been more aggressive early on in that communication. But hindsight's 2020. We've set a pretty clear path going back several administrations now, to increasing standards over time. Mike Foster certainly did that. Kathleen Blanco did the same. This governor had done the same, was increasing standards. And so at the BESE board, we saw this purely as an increase in standards. The next level of accountability, we get pretty high marks for accountability in our accountability system. The next level of accountability is an apples to apples comparison of how do you do compared to other students in other states. That's why the ACT is deemed so relevant. You know why? The ACT you take in Louisiana is the same ACT you take in Tennessee. So really what Common Core for us was just another level of accountability. That right now the LEAP test that we take in Louisiana is just given in Louisiana. So why don't we give a test that's given elsewhere and we'll know exactly where we stand. So we probably underestimated the potential of any rumors that went around and could have done a better job of that on the front end.
I interviewed some of the teachers of the year, past teachers of the year, and one of them, unnamed, I will tell you, had to say that she's been teaching Common Core now for several years. And she had to tell her own mother that it was not some horrible conspiracy. Because her mother had been getting mailings from groups around the country. So is there some movement that's going on outside of Louisiana that says Common Core is evil and is a takeover? And that's part of it.
Yeah, there are people out there saying that. And, you know, they have pulpits to speak from, and so, you know, there are people that say that. I don't agree with it, Pastor. You know,
Right, but I guess I'm asking, are you familiar with any organizations, national organizations that are then doing targeted mailings into Louisiana?
oh, I don't know. There may be, I have no idea. The question was, do I know of any groups, national groups, or other groups that are targeting Louisianians with anti-Common Core mail? I'm sure there's some. I don't think I think they are.
And on a sort of a slightly different subject, but related to this, because the Division of Administration has now come in using ministerial activities to really control what's going on at the Department of Education, are you having difficulty dealing with just day-to-day things at the level of approval of contracts is, you know, so low? Are you seeing difficulty in just the day-to-day, other things?
Well, here's how we make contract decisions. Very arbitrarily. But, so try to deal with that. I mean, I'll give you an example. We hired our own counsel. Of course, they objected. The contract we used was one they were very familiar with. That one they had approved many times. Well, they didn't approve it, probably. So it seems like we have a randomness to the decision making, and that's discomforting. But you know, here's the problem. The problem is because one person has decided to go against the constitutional bodies that make these decisions. We've now spent the better part of 180 days doing nothing but this. Meanwhile, we have things that we ought to be focused on, like Jumpstart, which would be a great program for this state. It needs the full attention of John White. Instead, they've got us debating things because of their politics. It does not serve our state well, does not serve our students well, does not serve our teachers well.
To what extent, if any, has the Common Core stuff been field tested in actual classrooms? And do you have any concerns about the kids who are already struggling now being further left behind in education?
No, I don't. I mean, you always worry about the students being left behind, so I don't want to dismiss that as an idea, but it's not due to Common Core. I mean, we've been implementing Common Core for 2 years in K, first grade. We also had 45,000 students actually take a test based on Common Core standards. They actually gave those questions, those students gave those questions very high marks. They enjoyed that test. Our results from those tests were actually much better than we anticipated. You know, one of the arguments was that if we gave a Common Core test, that the results would fall off the edge of the earth. Well, we gave a Common Core test, and the results did not fall off the edge of the earth. Our students actually did quite well. Furthermore, if you speak to practitioners, it's not universal. There's pockets where it's been more successful than others. So I don't want to just be too broad in my statement. But you can meet. There's plenty of evidence that from practitioners that while they struggle initially with the transition to Common Core, and quite frankly, they struggle quite a bit with that transition as it relates to their evaluation. Okay, I want to be fair that we're evaluating teachers at the same time that we're using new instruments. That causes some anxiety. If you put that anxiety to the side and just have a conversation about Common Core, okay, not with evaluation, just a conversation about Common Core, you get a fairly universal response, which is the standard is a better standard, the standard is a higher standard. I see my students learning things that they weren't learning previously, okay? And so we have tested it a great deal.
Can you speak a little bit, and this was probably Lisa, I just don't remember, about how students did on that sort of dry run test that you were doing together?
What we saw is that they did, relative to how they do on traditional elite tests, they performed the same relative on the Common Core test. So that's not a hard answer. So what I'm saying is that if a student was mastery under the traditional elite testing, elite questions, that they were performing at that same level on Common Core. We saw a correlation there. We did not see a big drop off that they're out of our normal test. If we had 10 questions that were Common Core based questions out of 50, we didn't see that they were dropping off significantly in those 10 questions. Does that make sense? Yes, ma'am.
So you said you all are doing this way, whether it's next month or 6 months from now. How long are you willing to go without knowing what assessment is going to be used in the spring?
Well, I hope we get guidance on 18th, where the courts will be considering who has the authority to make the determination of our assessments. Who gets to determine the content of the assessments? Is it the Division of Administration and a group of people in the procurement office that get to determine the questions on our test? Or is it the constitutional body given the authority to make those decisions? And I think it's fairly clear. And what I think they'll also conclude is that the existing contract allows for us to use that contract for testing. Now, we did at the last board meeting say that in the next 30 days, we will provide clear guidance to schools as to what they should expect on their assessments, regardless of what the court ends up deciding.
So you're just going to move forward. I mean, how does that work? I guess I don't
Well,
understand.
John, there are different things we could do. Now, none of them are as good as the plan that's in place and has been in place for 5 years. So let's make it clear. The best plan for us to do is to continue on the path that we're on. It's how we train teachers. It's the sample test that we give them. That's the best way to go. But if we don't get that guidance in a short period of time from the courts, and we're not told that, yes, you can proceed as outlined, then we'll have to give schools an alternative. One alternative is that we need to test ourselves, in-house. Now, that's not ideal. That causes other problems. But we're going to give clear guidance to districts as to what they should expect on their assessments.
Chaz, another study came out today saying that Louisiana had the fourth worst education system in the country. So I'm talking about the reading and math skills, 48th in the country. If we're doing so much better, why is it not showing up?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, one reason is our standard is still too low in the state. And that's part of the reason we're trying to raise the standard. Okay? And I'm going to tell you a fact that no one's really comfortable with. When we give the LEAP exams, and we put labels on what the outcome is, we've watered that down. Okay? To achieve basic, and to achieve mastery, and achieve proficiency, is watered down. So one of the reasons to do an apples to apples comparison is that kind of watering down is no longer acceptable. Our score in Louisiana is going to mean the same thing that a score in Tennessee made. So whether we call it mastery or something else, we'll know exactly how we compare. So one of the reasons to do this is that it's a higher standard and it's a higher level of accountability. Okay? Comparing ourselves to other states is a higher level of accountability than just comparing ourselves to ourselves. But we have, we do deal with probably a more significant number of students who enter school not kindergarten ready. Okay? And so we've had to address that in the early childhood program that we're doing. That's one of the positives that I could have talked about today, is making sure those students that want access to high quality early childhood can get it. That's one of the things that we're doing. And that is one of the reasons why, while we're seeing progress and we see pockets of success, to create a generation of success, we need to start as young as we can, as soon as we can. And I think we're doing better in the state.
One of the concerns that I have sometimes heard is that Common Core moves more toward higher abstract thinking and discourages basic memorization, let's say times tables, equations, vocabulary, just basic educational material. How would you respond to that concern?
Well, I would say it's not a concern of mine. Look, what we've been doing is not working. I don't know how else to explain that. If we've been doing basic timetable charts, is not equating to good results. Okay? Not only is Louisiana 48th or 49th or 50th, the United States is now in the middle of the pack of industrialized states in science and math. Okay, so those that want to defend the old way, there's not much to defend other than mediocrity. Okay? So there is a higher order of thinking that we're asking for in Common Core. You're not asked just to fill in the circle and give the answer. You're asked to explain why is this your answer? How did you get to your answer? Did you actually understand the question? Okay, that's a higher level of thinking, no doubt. But I will say this, at the same time that we're implementing Common Core and more critical thinking, at the same time we're spending more time on career education, high quality career education, not low quality career education, so that if a student doesn't plan on going to a 4-year college, they can exit high school with an actual national certification in a particular industry. So that is a real hands-on mathematical use of the information they're getting. So yes, we're asking for more critical thinking, and yes, it's different than the old way of doing math. But I would argue that the old way of doing math did not get us the results we want.
So what's the point of no return in terms of when you have to go to Plan B, because the course can take forever?
The law in the state is Common Core. So we're going to teach Common Core this year. We're down to a pretty simple question.
Right.
Who gets to determine the assessments?
Right.
Okay, who gets to determine that? The Constitution says it's the legislature and BESE gets to make education policy in this state. Okay? It's not the procurement office. We actually gave the governor 2 plans, both of which would allow for a bid to start tomorrow. Understand that. We gave the governor a plan that would allow the bid process to start tomorrow. Here's all we ask. Let us determine what the questions are. They won't do that. See, they've made it clear their intent is to stop Common Core and to stop PARCC testing in this state. They've made that statement clear. And the way they're doing that is through the procurement office. That's unconstitutional. The procurement office was not meant to determine education policy in this state.
So, I mean, if you don't get a resolution by, pick a date, September 1st, I mean, when do you have to go to that Plan B of creating a new test from scratch with an option?
We told John White at our last board meeting that in the next 30 days, we need to let students and teachers and schools know how we're going to give assessments this year.
You've already seen administrative interference. Do you expect legislative interference next session?
Well, there's a group of them, 17 by my count, that are going to interfere. That's their right. You know, it is the right of the legislature to try to change the law. They fought us vigorously in the last legislative session, and I think that's their role. I mean, that's my point. We've gone through the constitutional steps to have this debate. And so far, the legislature and BESE has come out on one side. Okay? I would suspect that next session, that the governor and certain legislators are going to try to unwind this. I can't speak for them. And I'm fine to have that debate. I've never shied away from a good debate. I'm glad to have it. I think the evidence is very clear that we need to set a higher standard in this state and that we ought to be competitive. And we ought to tell the rest of the world we're going to be competitive. But it is the right of the legislators to try to change that law. They have every right to do so. And we may have this debate every year for the next 20 years. I'm not certain.
Well, speaking of other issues and debates on how about vouchers, or scholarships, whatever we're calling them, they're expanding more and more. You all were an ally with the governor in this whole expansion. What do you think about it?
I'm a supporter of scholarships. And I make no apologies for that. I think every family when they wake up in the morning, should have a choice of sending their child to a quality school. And it ought not be based on the color of their skin, where they live, or how thick their wallet is. That's what I believe.
But it's going to be based on whether they go to a CD, the rated school that won't have a rating if you don't come up with a rating system.
Yeah, no,
Doesn't all this sort of fall apart?
if we have one of the implications of this debate is that if we don't have a proper assessment that allows for us to make the analysis that we want to make, it does have an impact on school performance scores and a number of other things. I mean, I think that's your point. So, it's not as simple as do we have an assessment or not. Is we can probably provide an alternative assessment, but what does that mean? Does that mean we're no longer able to give school performance scores? Does that mean we're no longer able to evaluate teachers? There is a lot. That's why the governor taking this unilateral step is so destructive. Okay, it undercuts all of our accountability, our entire system. And so it's not just an issue about Common Core. It's an issue regarding all of education, is what he's chosen to do.
Following up on the scholarships issue, many of the best private schools did not take the scholarships and do not take any scholarship students today, but they get many benefits from the state, transportation, tax breaks, and other things. Should not a school be required, if it's getting all these state benefits, to accept some of these poor students so that they can get the benefit of a high quality school?
I would encourage every school to participate, and I have done that privately. I will say this, Lane, those parents also pay taxes, and the support we give them outside of scholarship is fairly limited. Now, I'm willing to say if that's the way that people want to go, that either if you're going to participate in scholarships, that's the only way you have access to any tax dollars. If that's the way that people want to go, I'm willing to go that way. I would make the argument, and I send my kids to private school. I pay taxes. I pay a lot of taxes. And I don't have access to a high quality public school like I want. So as a taxpayer, what assistance that my school may get from the state, I think I pay for.
No more questions?
Thank you very much.